Like many nations in South America, Bolivia has been through a lot in the last few years, with events such as the ousting of previous President Evo Morales to the impact of the COVID-19 virus. Yet it seems that there is light at the end of the tunnel, at least in words, as the new president, Luis Arce, has promised to rebuild Bolivia. In the recent election, Arce swept to a landslide victory, winning some 55% of the votes against 6 other rivals on the ballot paper. But the importance of this election is the fact that Arce was the previous finance minister under Morales, hence giving hope to the electorate that the economy can emerge from the ashes.
Nadie quería vivir más como estos 8 meses porque la gente no necesita ir a Harvard para saber que todo lo hicieron mal. Todo lo hicieron mal y nos estaban llevando al precipicio. Hoy Lucho es la garantía de mejorar la economía y David es nuestra identidad como pueblos en el marco de este Estado plurinacional.
With the victory of Arce, former President Evo Morales has stated that he would now seek to return to his homeland, claiming that the new president-elect was the man who would prove that the economy could be turned around, and the belief in the party and system was the reason that Arce won the election so easily.
Hermanos bolivianos, hermanas bolivianas, que nos escuchan, con la experiencia con Lucho, presidente, otra vez vamos a sacar a Bolivia, vamos a levantar Bolivia. Otra vez Bolivia, o sea, un poquito de tiempo, va a estar encabezando en crecimiento económico como hicimos. Es el único movimiento político, el movimiento del socialismo, instrumento político por la soberanía de los pueblos, tiene visión de país, tiene un programa. Por eso ganamos ampliamente.
Hello and welcome to Economic Divide with me, Omid Rochandel, standing in for regular host Kaveh Taghwai as he covers the U.S. elections. On this week's show, we are going to look at the economy of Bolivia and ascertain whether the new president can use his financial experience to bring the Andean nation out of the red and back into the black. Don't forget, we are always happy to hear from you, our viewers, so why not get in touch with us via our Twitter feed using the mark here ED_program, or if you prefer, drop us a line using our email by writing to us at economicdivide@presstv.com. We can't wait to hear from you. Well, have the resurgence in the party and policies once led by Morales shown that people are unhappy with the current status in Bolivia? Under Morales, for example, extreme poverty fell from 33% of the population to just 15%, showing that Morales' model and management give the poorest deciles some hope. Morales also invested heavily in the infrastructure of the country, building roads, health clinics, and schools, as well as taking the decision to nationalize both the oil and gas industries, which in all cases just mentioned, not only provided a service to the people of the country, but also created jobs and income. With Arce at the helm of the finance ministry, Morales also managed to accumulate around $15 billion of international reserves, equating to around 50% of the GDP, bringing more people out of poverty and seeing the inequality level measures on the Gini index fall from 58 to 44 points.
South America is a particularly important geopolitical area when it comes to the pendulum of the left versus right political battle. On the one hand, many South American nations have embraced the notion of left-wing based politics, be it socialism or communism, but the point of view does not appease the foreign states who make it their business to interfere in those such nations, and hence sees the likes of the United States, for example, place pressure on such countries aimed ultimately at destabilizing the left. One only has to take a look at the example of Venezuela and the US distaste at the leadership of Nicolas Maduro, and the case of Cuba with the US history against Castro, and of course the dissatisfaction at the leadership in Bolivia that ultimately saw the president, Evo Morales, upstage from his seat and removed from power in a coup. But skip forward to today, and Bolivia has once again found itself swinging to the left with the election of Luis Arce, the former finance minister of Evo Morales, who swept to victory and in doing so has promised to revive the Bolivian economy like never before. With over a decade in the role of finance minister under Morales, Arce should have the experience necessary to make educated economic and financial decisions.
I think it's going to help enormously. He had 10 years experience as a finance minister. He is very highly regarded in international circles. He presided over a period of rapid economic growth. and also significant improvements in poverty reduction. So it's altogether quite a positive scenario for the future.
Yet the election results in Bolivia, although accepted by the challenger Carlos Mesa, has seen the rise of the Movement for Socialism, or the MAS party, led by Arce, spark some protests in the process. With many believing that Arce's links to Morales could see the former president return to some notion of power in the country, it's highly likely that Arce will take the issue with an air of caution, keeping Morales at arm's length as he sets to rebuild the Bolivian economy. With many nations around the world congratulating Arce on his victory, surprisingly, the US has also stepped forward with praise, recognizing the credible election process. However, it now remains to be seen as to whether the capitalist US maintain their views on the socialist Bolivians in the future, and whether the message of support is merely a disguise to be ready to stop other Latin American nations following suit.
Is Bolivia being used as a political pawn by the US? Bolivia is a very rich nation when it comes to natural resources, with the nation enjoying around 140 million tons of lithium resources buried beneath its famed salt flats, which is estimated to account for around 70% of the world's total lithium reserves, and is something that many have their eyes on. Just last year, Bolivia signed an agreement with China to the value of an initial $2.3 billion investment into the lithium available in the country, with the Chinese eyeing the use of the resource to fuel the emerging battery-powered electric vehicle market, which is estimated to be valued at over $115 billion and expected to grow fivefold by 2026. It is hence why the US were keen to see Morales go, as the US only have a trade value with Bolivia to the figure of around $1 billion, with goods exported to Bolivia valued at $562 million, whilst imports, including lithium, are at $486 million.
The arrival of the coronavirus in Bolivia immediately took its toll on the recent elections held in the nation, with the original election date set to last May. However, in order to stem the rising number of cases, it was decided by the electoral bodies to postpone the election for the sake of keeping the virus in check. Yet much like the rest of South America, Bolivia is no exception when it comes to the virus, as at the time of writing, the country has seen a total of 141,000 confirmed cases of infection, with around 8,700 deaths, which compared to other nations is still relatively low in numbers. Much like everywhere else in the world, the country has had to introduce some forms of lockdown in the bigger cities, which of course has led to store closures, offices winding down, and many other commercial and economic premises taking a hit, which for a small nation like Bolivia can have a devastating impact on their economy. With the nation receiving several loans to help it emerge from the pandemic, for example, a $254 million loan from the World Bank, how then is the Bolivian economy coping with the virus, and other loans being granted to them a benefit or a hindrance?
Bolivia has been affected by coronavirus, and it's not clear that how exact the data is coming out about that. It certainly underscores the need for a well-funded, accessible health service, which is an absolute priority to build up, and it's entirely appropriate that political leaders turn their attention to that. But with regards to the loans, that's a more worldwide question, I think. Like that you can, I think the IMF are strongly encouraging countries to take out loans, which is an interesting turn of events in itself.
For Bolivia, tourism is also a major source of income. However, the arrival of the virus has also taken its tolls on this sector, with the pandemic believed to be responsible for around $890 million of losses for the Bolivian Tourist Board, with around $530 million of that coming from domestic tourism and $360 million coming from inbound tourism. For the many indigenous people of Bolivia, the arrival of the COVID-19 virus is of particular importance, especially for the more isolated or rural communities who are already less exposed to viruses than others and have little or no access to healthcare facilities. For some people in the country, they've turned to traditional forms of medicine to help them through. However, as the global results have shown when it comes to dealing with the virus, the consequences of corona have been devastating, with over 1 million dead worldwide. The struggle continues for both Bolivia and the rest of the world.
Joining me in the studio today is Diego Sanchez Ancochea, a professor of political economy development from the University of Oxford. He specializes in the development and economies of Latin American nations and has work published in various journals, including World Development and the Journal of Latin American Studies, as well as having co-edited numerous books. His current work focuses on explaining why some Latin American countries are more unequal than others. Professor, many thanks for joining our show today.
Thank you so much for the opportunity and for the invitation. It's great to be here.
Well, my first question is about Bolivia itself. We have seen that the finance minister, Luis Arce, has won a landslide victory in the election and has immediately promised to help the economy of the country grow. Now, my question is, what kind of challenges is he going to face in delivering on his promises?
So I think we should remember that Bolivia has faced, like the rest of Latin America, the combination of a health crisis, an economic crisis, and in the Bolivian case, a political crisis as well in the last few months. So I think there will be two big challenges. The first is how do they get the money from their public accounts to fund projects that are very much needed, and the other is how do you regain political stability and sometimes of collaboration between different groups on society that have been split in recent years.
Thank you. Now, your current work focuses on how Latin American nations, some of them, are more unequal than others. And my question is, how is Bolivia able to establish itself as a serious economic player in the region and beyond?
It's a great question. So Bolivia historically has been one of the most unequal countries, particularly between the indigenous population and the small white elite. But during the Morales administration in the last decade and a half, actually things improved a lot. So Latin America Bolivia reduced inequality more than any other Latin American country. Of course, the big question is whether with a new president we can start back trying to reduce inequality and promote development or not, and we'll have to see in the next few months and years.
Finally, like many nations in Latin America, indigenous people play a huge part in the economics and politics of the country. How have indigenous people in Bolivia contributed to the economy of the country? And is this unwavering support for Morales and Arce a good sign for the future of the country and maybe other Latin American nations?
So another great question. So Morales' project was very much about trying to incorporate indigenous peoples and increase their political rights. And as a result, actually a new middle class of indigenous peoples emerged, and indigenous peoples as a political force also present in the government also appeared, and it was important. The last few months, the government that replaced Morales tried to actually reverse some of these gains, but I am very hopeful that Arce will start or enhance the power of indigenous peoples, and we might actually see a new renewal of a Latin America that has more success at reducing inequalities and bringing indigenous rights to the forefront.
Professor Diego Sanchez-Ancochea from the University of Oxford, many thanks for being on the show today. It was lovely hearing your thoughts on this topic.
Great talking to you, and I look forward to future occasions.
All right, make sure you check out Professor Sanchez-Ancochea's upcoming book, which is titled The Cost of Inequality in Latin America, published by IB Tauris and available for pre-order now from the usual outlets. Okay, so we are about to take a quick break here on Economic Divide, but don't go anywhere as we have plenty more coming up. We're joined by our regular current affairs and impact analyst, Mahan Abedin, as he runs us through his findings on the situation in Bolivia. We also take a look at how Bolivia's main natural resource, lithium, is helping to fuel an emerging economy, as well as looking at how Bolivia's political and economic example compares to that of other Latin American nations. So stay right where you are. We'll be right back after this short message. Bolivia, as we know, is the world's largest producer of lithium. Let's now take a look at how lithium is playing a part in one of the world's most lucrative emerging markets in our next report.
Bolivia is said to hold around 25% of the world's total lithium resources, with some estimates placing it as high as 70%. Along with Chile and Argentina, Bolivia make up the so-called lithium triangle, with the metal being concentrated in various salt plains around South America, covering the Atacama Desert and its neighbouring areas. Some have called the exploration and mining of the metal as the white gold rush, with a total value on the market of an estimated $5.9 billion across the world, with the potential of the market rising in the near future, in part sparked by one certain industry. With the world paying more attention to the carbon footprint issue, many of the world's leading car makers are now turning their attention to the electric car market, which, as we all know, relies heavily on batteries inside the vehicles, which of course are mainly fueled by lithium. Sales of electric cars topped 2.1 million units in 2019, with total electric car sales accounting for 2.6% of the global market. However, zero-emission vehicles are set to rise dramatically over the next decade, with diesel vehicle production for one seeing an eventual phase-out, followed by likely, one day, petrol. One of the biggest emerging markets in the electrical vehicle production line is China, who are already home to the largest number of electrical vehicle charging points in the world, suggesting that the Chinese will no doubt be eyeing the rest of the world for them to place their electrical vehicles, hence competing with some very big players. So will Bolivia's vast resources of lithium come to the rescue of the Bolivian economy, in particular when it comes to assisting in the production of batteries for electric vehicles?
It's a bit complicated. Bolivia forms part of what's called the lithium triangle with Argentina and Chile, and frankly both Argentina but particularly Chile have moved faster than Bolivia had in terms of developing those resources. Bolivia has 1/4 of the known resources of in the world of lithium. The problem is it's found at a higher altitude than in Chile and Argentina, and technically it is more complicated to produce lithium hydroxide or lithium carbonate, which is the key compound which is used for batteries.
But should Bolivia instead be wary and consider the notion of killing two birds with one stone? When Evo Morales was in power, he suggested that Bolivia should not only produce the lithium to sell abroad to make batteries, but also consider the idea of building the batteries themselves, hence adding another layer to the economy and leaving something for Arce to consider in his upcoming term and promise of rebuilding the economy.
I'm pleased to welcome back into the studio our regular current affairs and impact analyst, Mahan Abedin. Mahan, thank you for joining us today.
You're welcome.
So, people in Bolivia have made a very bold political statement by electing Arce, the former finance minister. But what are the economic impacts of this election on the country?
Well, absolutely. So it was a surprise electoral victory a week or so ago. So the socialists are back. Now, we have the tweet here, victory against US imperialism. Well, yes, but then the really serious issues about rebuilding partnerships with China and just generally going back to the Evo Morales philosophy of building the country from bottom up. And of course, in Bolivia, the story isn't just political, it's social, it's kind of ethnic, because Morales, if you like, he represented, or he purported to represent the indigenous people who have historically been dispossessed and impoverished in Bolivia. So this is a really big story. And I think the victors in this election have got their work cut out, to be honest, in terms of putting the economy on a stable footing.
So, next?
So Luis Arce's most pressing challenge, economy, obviously, like everywhere else, is a huge concern for the Bolivians, more so than COVID-19. So again, this just speaks to the big challenges ahead, really. Let's not forget, this is an impoverished country. Even by Latin American standards, it's very poor. But I would add to that the foreign policy challenge, or at least the regional challenge, because Bolivia now is in a kind of a hostile environment. You have Brazil that has this kind of looks to Trump, so by extension, they're an enemy of Bolivia. You have Colombia, which is very belligerent, led by a right-wing regime. Their only ally really is Venezuela, and they have problems of their own. So third and final tweet, you have, so it's had good growth, big reductions in poverty. So it's a mixed picture, really. So I mean, under Morales, they followed this Venezuelan policy of helping the indigenous people. The only problem with that is if you focus on one group, So by extension, by definition, you're going to impoverish or at least disadvantage another group. I think what this new Bolivian regime needs above all is to show national unity, to demonstrate it can look after the economic well-being of all the Bolivian people. And I think that is the route to success for them. Because if you read from this tweet, and this is very accurate actually, it captures all their problems in a very pithy tweet. But so really they need a holistic approach.
To wrap it up, I can say we are hopeful, but it's not going to be easy.
This was a very pleasant victory, I think. I think it puts aside all the difficulties from last year, because last year there was an ugly coup in Bolivia, there was a lot of violence, a lot of people were hurt. This at least is an opportunity to correct those wrongs, and as long as they can get the best good policies in place, they have a good future, I think.
Mahan, thank you so much for joining us today as well.
You're welcome.
That was Mahan Oedin, our regular current affairs and impact analyst. Now, in our final report today, we take a look at how Bolivia compares to and interacts with its neighboring countries in Latin America. So stay right where you are.
South America, as we recently discovered in our recent programme right here on Economic Divide, where we covered the Inter-American Development Bank, is a highly complex continent, especially when one studies it on an economic level. On the one hand, you have a country such as Brazil, a nation that sits comfortably in the top 10 of the world's largest GDPs, with over $2.05 trillion per year income, and hence making it a key emerging power. On the other hand, you have a country like Argentina, a nation which is on the verge of a second financial crisis and is about to see its currency plummet in value. Across South America, there's also a whole host of layers in between. For Bolivia, relations with its neighbours is highly important, in particular as Bolivia is a landlocked country and access to ports are limited. It's hence why Bolivia and Chile, for example, have clashed in the past when it comes to this particular benefit. So how are Bolivian relations with their neighbours now?
That region, like you've mentioned, Brazil, Argentina, Chile, and Chile as well. They're the big players in that region. Bolivia gets compared more often to Peru. One of the key challenges for Bolivia is really to turn its economy away from reliance on natural resources. So diversifying the economy in general, which could include some exploitation of natural resources, but diversifying it so it's not so much for reliance is key.
But it's not just nation states that Bolivia interact with the nation also playing a role in liaising with international institutions, which also see relations appearing to look promising for Bolivia.
Internationally, with the International Monetary Fund, relations, I think, are probably going to be not as bad as people might think. IMF has recently been going through a kind of mea culpa and is noticeable shift in its approach to poverty reduction and income distribution and taxation of international wealth. So I think Arce in some ways fits the mold there with this new thinking in the IMF.
However, like many other nations in South America, it's the interaction with the US that ultimately many want to address. The arrival of Evo Morales certainly soured ties between the two, with the unionist Morales proving popular with farmers and locals in Bolivia as he sought to eradicate US policy in the country, going as far to say that wherever there's a US ambassador, there's a coup. How right he was. As mentioned earlier in the show, with the arrival of Arce at the helm and Pompeo sending his wishes, will the US's warm approach to Bolivia be nothing more than a wolf in sheep's clothing?
For many countries in South America, the resistance to U.S. imperialism is a fact of everyday life, with Venezuela and Bolivia being prime examples of such policy. It is hence why the comeback of an indigenous party in Bolivia is being hailed as a miracle by some, with the working class front lines clearly defending the people of the country. With the U.S. having been involved in so many regime changes around the world, the onus is now on Bolivia and President-elect Luis Arce to show that the nation can in fact stand on its own 2 feet, embrace its natural resources, and most importantly, set an example to other nations in the region and beyond as to how to stand up to imperialist capitalism. What now remains to be seen is whether other nations in the region will follow this example and see foreign interference in regional affairs become a thing of the past. Don't forget, we always want to hear from you, so why not follow us on our Twitter page using the markyourED_program, or write into us at economicdivide@presstv.com. We'd love to hear from you. That's all about the time we have for this episode. On behalf of myself, Omid Roshandel, and the whole team here on Economic Divide, thanks for watching. Stay safe. We'll see you again next time.